The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show, The Right Side with Doug Billings. Here I am. And to those of you in Kansas, a special hello. It's your favorite candidate for governor right here. Doug Billings for Kansas.com, ladies and gentlemen. Doug Billings for F-O-R Kansas.com. Head over there. Today, part 2 of my series on child and human trafficking in the United States. Today's special focus on Kansas. We're going to look at what our legislature has done, and they've done some good things with regards to protecting children, but they can do more, and there are some loopholes that we're going to discuss today. There's a group, guardagainsttrafficking.org, guardagainsttrafficking.org. Their president, Allie Hopper, and Vice President Dr. Jarrod Sadulski are joining me for part 2 of this discussion, and they're going to explain these loopholes. They, Allie, have done a legislative analysis about our statutes and our laws in Kansas. Folks, it doesn't matter if you live in Kansas or not, because this issue applies to you no matter where you live in the United States. I want to work as governor with our legislature to create amendments that will button down and close these loopholes so that we can prosecute, hunt down, and jail the animals who are trafficking our children and others in this country, in this state. So, as I've said, day 1 of my governorship, an executive order will be signed. The Child Human Trafficking Task Force will be created. I will direct the Kansas Highway Patrol and the National Guard in Kansas to assist Tom Holman and ICE and Kristi Noem at the Department of Homeland Security to lock down Kansas against this trafficking and to find the people who are conducting this horror within our state. I'll also ask Chris Kobach, the Attorney General, to use the KBI to investigate the situation as well. So all of that executive order, it's a key campaign pillar of mine as I run for governor. No other candidate in the state is talking about this issue for the children, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to end this horror. And so today, part 2 with Allie Hopper and Dr. Jarrod Sadulski from guardagainsttrafficking.org, part 2 of my series. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The right side is now upon you. Are you ready? Let's go.
Hey everybody, my name is General Mike Flynn, and I'm here to do a big shout out for my great friend and one of the best in the business, Mr. Doug Billings. Right side with Doug Billings, right side with Doug Billings. Doug is the future of the airwaves when it comes to independent broadcasters and podcasters. He is the new Rush Limbaugh. He's exactly what America needs right now, looking for honesty, looking for wisdom, looking for truth, looking for patriotism. Listen to Doug Billings at Right Side with Doug Billings. God bless you and God bless America, and thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are winning. We're winning, winning, winning. Welcome to The Right Side with Doug Billings. Are you ready?
We are not liberal snowflakes who melt away in the face of tragedy, adversity, and challenge. We are a covenant nation under God, and His divine providence is not dead and it's not gone. It is living within each and every one of you. And you will bring it to life in such a way that the world has never seen before. We never back down. We never give up. We march forward.
Human trafficking is one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our lifetime. In the 5 minutes I speak today, men, women, and children are being sold, exploited, and brutalized within our borders.
I received whistleblower information that minors were being released to sponsors with criminal records that included domestic violence and child molestation.
The Biden administration is failing these children. It's failing basic human rights.
85,000 children, unaccompanied children, apprehended, given over to HHS, or are released to a sponsor are unaccounted for.
The administration can't tell you whether these children are being trafficked, whether they're going to school, whether their health care is being attended to, whether they're being recruited into gangs.
As a mom, to think about what is happening to these children, to think about the fact that there were no background checks. The operational realities of this program are disgusting and despicable.
The federal government and the federal taxpayer then picks up the last mile delivery in human trafficking and is putting these young girls into sex slavery, putting these people into labor camps, or into who knows what.
Cartels target migrant children for the purpose of exploiting them into the United States through the Unaccompanied Children Program.
I could not believe that a federal government agency is using billions of taxpayer dollars to place vulnerable migrant children into the hands of sponsors with criminal history, gang affiliation, to whom many are not even their parents.
We interviewed a young girl who shared that on her journey over the border, people in her group were robbed, several girls, including her, were raped, and she witnessed a decapitation. This is the reality the federal government has created by failing to secure our border.
The HHS ORR program is the biggest failure in government history that I have ever witnessed. HHS ORR leadership and the contractor allowed children to be trafficked on their watch, and the taxpayers continue to fund it.
President Biden, you have the power to prevent this. You can secure our border and reform ORR to protect children from harm.
How many more minors have been released into the care of others who claim to be their parents or family friends who don't really care about their well-being? These children deserve nothing less than our maximum effort.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Here we are with Dr. Jarrod Sadulski and Ali Hopper of guardagainsttrafficking.org. In part one, we kind of gave a national and international sketch of the framework and the backdrop of child and human trafficking in the United States and what it means. And today we're going to look at Kansas-specific issues because, as I've said, and as Dr. Sadulski and Ali have corroborated, this horrible evil happens in every zip code in this country, ladies and gentlemen. We have got to become used to that and understand what we're up against. And in Kansas, this is a major pillar of my campaign for governor. I've promised that on day one, there will be an executive order signed creating the Anti-Child Human Trafficking Task Force that will look into this and partner with, I'm going to order the KBI, the State Highway Patrol, and the Kansas National Guard to shut down and hunt down the perpetrators, the evil people who conduct these terrible, terrible trafficking situations. So that just a high sketch of what we're going to do. We're going to involve the government. We're going to fully cooperate with Tom Holman and ICE, President Trump's agenda, Kristi Noem with Homeland Security, and so forth. Kash Patel at the national FBI level. You better believe we're going to partner with all of those. I'll be on the phone with every one of them, opening Kansas up to them, to what they want to help us with in regards to all of this. So today, we're going to look at Kansas legislation and what potential loopholes currently exist, because we want to work with legislators. We want to help them understand the language that's necessary to shut down possible loopholes and so forth that might provide escape routes for these people if they're captured. So Ali has done us a kindness and performed an analysis of current Kansas legislation, and I'm going to turn it over to her and Dr. Sadulski to cover with us in Kansas what we currently have and where we can go to make it better. So, Ali, Dr. Sadulski, take it away, please, and we're eager to hear what you have to say about Kansas.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here, Doug. What you're doing is incredibly important. It's raising awareness and drawing attention to what is one of the largest humanitarian issues of our lifetime, and it affects Kansas directly. And I know that because I've been in Kansas. In April of this year, I spent time in Kansas conducting training for various audiences on human trafficking. And what I discovered was, one, there's a human trafficking problem, and two, there's a major lack of awareness in Kansas. And Kansas has human trafficking throughout the state. It's in metropolitan areas, it's in rural areas. And just to put in perspective, the Human Trafficking Hotline, which is a national hotline that receives calls of potential human trafficking situations, they have received thousands of calls in Kansas alone since its inception. And so it just reflects that, in fact, Kansas does, have human trafficking.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Dr. Sadulski was saying, so not only is there a lack of awareness, but there really stems a lack of understanding of what human trafficking is. We were very happy to see many people watch the movie Sound of Freedom. It brought a general awareness, a preliminary awareness on the issue. But what it did do was that it portrayed trafficking in a country that was abroad. Many people didn't relate that and bring that understanding inwards into how it actually happens in our country, what it looks like. Are there signs? Are there red flags that we can pick up on before trafficking starts to happen? If we see trafficking, are we able to identify it? And if we identify it, what do we do about it? So we really need to understand what human trafficking is. A lot of people think immediately to sex trafficking. There is a overlook into labor trafficking and by extension domestic servitude. So understanding labor trafficking, understanding that people are forced into work situations, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the textile industry, whether it's construction. And a lot of people say, I mean, we've seen lawmakers say, well, who are going to pick the blueberries?
Yeah.
And who are going to pick the berries for our farms? And we're saying, so, okay, so you're advocating not only for individuals to do the labor at a lower income or a lower pay grade that American citizens would receive, but many of these individuals are forced into these situations. They have to pay off a debt. They see little to none of that money. That money goes straight to cartel and gang operations, and it is to pay off a debt. They're living in horrible circumstances, and there are children that are actually being forced not only into sex trafficking, but labor trafficking as well. So people need to be aware that sex trafficking isn't the only form of trafficking. Labor trafficking is happening right in front of our eyes. And while we're fighting for a lower cost of goods and services and support for our agriculture industry and our textile industry, we need to understand that it needs to be done in a safe but humanitarian way. We need to consider that this is modern day slavery, and we can't be supporting modern day slave trade so that we can get a cheaper t-shirt when we want to go to the store. It's absolutely abhorrent.
Amen.
And Allie had a good point. She mentioned the children. I'd like to talk about the children a second. So the unaccompanied alien child program is not very well understood. I didn't fully understand it until a couple of years ago. What it is children come to the border that are unaccompanied. They don't have a parent with them, and they often claim that they want to reunite with somebody in the United States. And so under the last administration, we had a crisis of over 480,000 of these unaccompanied children coming to the border. And I'm going to bring it to Kansas here specifically in a second, but I want your audience to understand that what happened in the last administration in terms of these children being sent to unvetted sponsors in Kansas throughout the United States has led to exponentially high levels of sex trafficking and human trafficking of these children. Allie and I have been to the border. We've encountered these children that had the piece of paper of who they're to request to be their sponsor. And we asked, well, who gave you that piece of paper? And they say the bad man that brought them to the border, referring to the cartel members, because nobody goes through the border without the cartel.
Right.
So these children are sent to sponsors under the last administration, without meaningful background checks. All the sponsor needs to do is to provide a picture, photo ID, and a physical address. So in Kansas, under the Biden-Harris administration, in 2023 alone in Kansas, there were 719 of these children sent to unvetted sponsors in Kansas. And what's important to note about that is the children were sent to a sponsor that we really did no meaningful background check on. We discovered that 70% of the sponsor information that was given to the Biden-Harris administration was fraudulent. So nearly 3 out of 4 children that were sent to a sponsor, there was fraudulent information on the sponsor involved. And that exists certainly within Kansas. Part of the problem now is we've lost the children. An Office of Inspector General report came out in September of 2024 stating that 324,000 of these unaccompanied children are unaccounted for. And we spoke to officials while we were in Kansas, and we were informed that nationwide, there's been, as of April, there was about 100,000 checks done on the well-being of these children. And out of that, only 5,000 were found, which means 95,000 out of 100,000 were not able to be located, and the trail is cold. There's nothing further to do to go look for that child. And this is an issue that today, as we speak, there are children being trafficked in Kansas at this moment.
What's your best guess on where in the world these children might be? Are they working in a field picking produce? Are they in someone's house as a domestic or sex slave? I mean, what's any kind? I mean, it's just, again, it's brutal to think about, ladies and gentlemen. It is absolutely abhorrent, but it needs to be said and discussed. Any best guesses on where these kids may be?
In Kansas, I think a lot of them are stuck in agriculture. And I think they're in poultry factories. I think that they're in, these factories that are using these children as cheap labor. So, they're undocumented. We've come across some of these children. They're dirty. They're unkept, and they're everywhere. We've seen them. We've seen them selling like trinkets on the street and the sidewalk in the cities. Why is that relevant? Because they have to make a certain amount of money selling these trinkets before they can go home, because they don't realize it, but they in fact are being trafficked. They're not free to leave that work situation, therefore they're a trafficking victim. So they're throughout. They're in Kansas City, they're in Lawrence, they're throughout Kansas, Topeka. And it's a combination of agriculture and sex trafficking. Some are sold for illegal adoption as well.
Now, they really are released after they've committed, or they've completed this financial requirement that the cartels have put upon them. Are they really released and just gone home to whoever, mom and dad, or what? I mean, or it's because I guess what I'm thinking, a little bit of a cynic inside of me. Why would they release them? Why would they not just keep them forever until they're either caught or whatever?
So some of them are killed. Some of them, in terms of sex trafficking, they're only useful to the trafficker for a certain amount of time. But once they become emaciated because of the drugs, once they become ill because of the unprotected sex, they're no longer of any value to the trafficker, and they're just discarded in the street. So whenever you see that 16-year-old, whether it's a migrant child or a U.S. citizen, and she's strung out, she's being arrested for petty crimes, stealing to eat, things like that, that often started as a trafficking victim.
Wow.
Well, and the fact is that the cartel members, the gang members, they know that these individuals are not going to speak out against them. Not only are they in fear of their lives, they're in fear of their families' lives, whether they're in the interior of the country or back in their home country. And also, they know that they are in the country illegally. And so who are they going to go to talk about their circumstance? The law enforcement agents that they're afraid of, that they're going to get deported. They're not going to speak out. So cartels and gangs know they're not going to speak out, and they use that to their advantage. And some of these children and adults stay in the life because of that lack of ability to, or that struggle of ability to work legally. And so, once they pay off the debt, they have to still maintain a base sort of income. And with this administration cracking down on illegal immigration, it is important to note that a lot of these illegals are going to stay in circumstances that they know can provide them that income that they need to survive. But like Jarrod mentioned, if you look at your agriculture industry, if you look at your textile industry, if you look at your construction industry, many of those people won't even acknowledge or understand that they're being trafficked. When you have no access to your passport, your documentation, when you're giving a percentage of your income to the cartel member you're working for, and you are not free to leave, that is a trafficking situation. When you don't have bodily autonomy to be able to go where you want, talk to who you want, and leave, yep, that is trafficking. Right. So we need to understand these concepts, and the people of Kansas need to understand that there is trafficking going on. The border exacerbated the issue, but there is still that existence of domestic trafficking that has been in existence for a very long time. And they also need to understand that the United States is the highest buyer for sex trafficking in the world. Why is that? It's a moral issue, and we need to understand why, because the cartel plainly said, we go there because the demand is high. Why is the demand high? Because we have individuals in the interior of the country, citizens, that are willing to purchase this, whether it's sex, whether it's hiring a illegal alien to conduct the work that you need them to do. And they think that they're being kind by hiring them and giving them a job, even if it's, cents on the dollar, but it's not kind. It's modern day slavery. It is exploitation of an individual when you're not paying them what they need to be paid, what they should be paying. And like we had mentioned, at the cost of a cheaper t-shirt, we are endorsing modern day slavery.
And those days are numbered. If I'm elected, we are going to come after not only the cartels, but these businesses and other buyers, for lack of a better word. They will be pursued, to put it lightly. You all have spoken to the legislature here in Kansas. You've toured the state. You've been on the campuses of some major universities. Tell me about Kansas legislation, what we've got. And Allie, I know you've done an analysis on that and where you recommend we should go. So as I begin to talk about this on campaign stops, for example, and soliciting the help of our Republican friends, and let's be honest, I find it hard to believe that anybody could disagree with the fact that we have to put an end to this, whatever party you're in. But I do know that the radical left want. I've said this on my show, and it seems inflammatory, but I'm convinced that it's the truth. Elements of the radical left, I'm not saying that every Democrat, but of the radical left, wants this chaos to exist in the country for a number of reasons, but key among them is because I think they believe that when chaos strikes, it causes us to believe that we might need the big government to come in, swoop in, and save us with more laws, so forth and so on. But that's a story for a different time and a different day. But that's my own personal take on a part of the reason why the radical left wants this. Chaos is what they want. I think evidence of the obvious is sufficient. The border is the most obvious example of purposeful chaos. So as you look at what we've got legislatively and where we should go, tell me about that. What have you found?
So to take it a step back, the journey of this legislative review of the grooming bill started in Florida. So it started with working with Mary Flynn.
Yes, I know her well. Yes.
Yeah, she had approached me with a piece of legislation, and what it was that it was a amendment to a grooming bill, and her goal was to push forward a message started by Michelle Peterson, who is out of Illinois. Her son was sexually groomed by a teacher, and they had a already established grooming bill in Illinois, but Michelle Peterson's goal was to amend this grooming bill to enhance penalties and other aspects of the grooming bill. When Mary Flynn gave me this piece of legislation, me as a paralegal, my dad as an attorney, we took it back and we examined the criminal code. We realized that we couldn't use this piece of legislation because it's an amendment to a grooming bill. And if you don't have a grooming bill, there's nothing to amend. And so we did the due diligence, did the research, understood what Illinois had, which was shocking to us because they've had it since 2012, but it was in a deep blue state. And so for a deep blue state to have a grooming bill from 2012 was surprising to us, but we figured, what can we do to enhance, to further strengthen this language because it came from a blue state? What can we do as a red state, supermajority state to make it stronger, to make it more of model legislation for the rest of the country and kind of revitalize this effort to protect children from adults sexually grooming them? And so we developed the language. We ended up finding lawmakers that believed in the mission. We had 2 House reps and we had a senator, a state senator, and they came to us. We found them by God's grace, because the 2 House reps one was a pastor, one had connections and education within law enforcement. The state senator was a former prosecutor. So it was the dream team to be able to establish meaningful legislation that could actually give law enforcement the tools they need to intervene. We had done interviews with sex crimes, DCF, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to make sure that the language that we had developed was strong, gave law enforcement the teeth to be able to intervene and prosecutors to be able to prosecute. Those were the 3 components we were looking for. And so long story short, and without some challenges, we got it through the legislative process. We got it signed and signed into law, and now it's a statute in the state of Florida. And we were also able to get it in Iowa, working the same way with an Iowa state rep. Arizona and then Georgia now has a grooming bill too. I believe Montana has one, and we're working with a couple other states, including yours, hopefully, to get a grooming bill. But really what it starts with a statutory analysis of the criminal code within that state. A lot of law enforcement believe that, or not a lot of law enforcement, a lot of individuals believe that grooming, sexual grooming of an adult with a minor is covered in their criminal code. Oh, we have that. That's got to be covered. But when you take a deeper dive into understanding what grooming actually is and what it isn't, you start to understand that the luring and enticing component, when an adult lures a child or entices a child to go to a house, to go conduct a certain activity, the grooming process has already started and been well in play for a certain period of time, because the adult wouldn't be able to lure and entice a minor without grooming them to be comfortable to lure and entice them. They also have obscenity rules, but that only comes into play when you're exchanging a photo or a video. So when we're talking about Kansas and when we're talking about the examination of the criminal code, that is exactly the view and the scope that we took when we examined the criminal code in Kansas and the state laws that exist there. So understanding that luring and enticing and obscenity exist in most of the states that we've encountered, it doesn't account for that grooming process that happens previous to that. So I had sent over the grooming analysis, the statutory analysis, and I like to preface, I'm not an attorney, I'm a paralegal. This is not legal advice in any way, but there were a couple of articles and statutes that stood out to me. One of them was indecent liberties with a child, indecent solicitation of a child, electronic solicitation, sexual exploitation of a child. But a lot of them had gaps. They covered lewd fondling and touching, enticing a child to engage in such acts. They cover enticing a child to commit or submit to an unlawful sexual act, electronic communication with an intent to commit a sexual act, but they don't cover grooming. And so some of the gaps are, one of them was that the first statute, the indecent liberties with a child, it only criminalizes physical contact or direct solicitation of sexual acts, fails to address the grooming process before any direct sexual advance. The indecent solicitation, it requires a clear sexual objective in the enticement and does not criminalize grooming behaviors that precede luring and enticing. Gap, like for the electronic solicitation, much like the one I just mentioned, it requires a direct connection to sexual intent and does not criminalize grooming behaviors like emotional manipulation or normalizing sexual conversation. So an adult can technically have a sexual conversation with a child, not luring or enticing them to do so, but just, generically have an inappropriate, harmful, explicit conversation. To some law enforcement have called that sexting.
Yep.
And many state agencies can't do anything about it. But the biggest one that I noticed was the promotion of minors of harmful material to minors. And so it covers sexually explicit or obscene material to minors. But groomers typically often use non-obscene material, which is suggestive but not explicit. And so when you're covering behaviors, you can end up using memes, emojis, slang, GIFs, videos that are of movies, and it's not a direct exchange of child pornography because you're exchanging memes and GIFs. So when we took a deeper dive into that specific statute, we needed to really understand the definition material. Material as when it's used as a noun and not as an adjective. And sorry, I'm referring to my notes because it's pretty in the weeds here. But for those listening, it is statute 21-6402, promotion of to minors of material harmful to minors. And the terms obscenity and harmful to minors rely heavily on how the law defines material, and that creates significant loopholes. So the main loopholes that I highlighted are that it's a narrow focus on tangible and explicit content. There's ambiguity around obscenity and harmful content. So, example, a predator could send a message like, "You're so mature for your age. Don't tell your parents that we talk late at night. I bet you have a lot of boyfriends." That type of stuff where an adult has no business texting a 13-year-old that at all. In my mind, an adult has no business texting a 13-year-old, period. But when you're dealing with educators, sports, coaches, faith leaders, your neighbor down the street, these are behaviors that are harmful to children that would not be tolerated in the workplace. Could you imagine, the workplace harassment laws that exist? And if an adult communicated with another adult in this manner, they would go to HR immediately.
Yeah, I can tell you, as a VP of HR for 23 years prior to my show, I can tell you that's exactly the truth. Yes.
Yeah, if someone touched someone on the shoulder or say, "Oh, I bet you have a lot of boyfriends," or, "Oh, started talking about things in a very sensual way."
Well, men can't even say, "Hey, nice dress." I mean, they can't even say that anymore. I mean, it's
exactly, but we don't offer the same protections for our children. And why is that?
Yeah.
When we were going through the Florida statute, the process by introducing this bill, there was a concern that it was hindering your First Amendment rights. And so they did many statutory analysis of within Tallahassee. The attorneys looked at it, and there were elements that said, no, this doesn't infringe on First Amendment rights. And obviously, as conservatives, we want to preserve and protect our First Amendment rights, but this does not apply to that. And so when you're talking about, again, it doesn't cover non-sexual grooming material, romantic music or gifts, flirtatious messages. If you're messaging as an adult and you're messaging a child through Snapchat, I mean, that already has an appearance of impropriety.
Right. Agreed.
And I remember talking to one of the lawmakers when we were testifying in front of one of the committees. And he was like, "Well, what if a adult, in a school setting needs to talk to a child? Yeah, couldn't there be an appearance of impropriety?" And I said, much like in an office setting, you might want to leave the door open or have maybe another individual in there with you. I mean, that's just how our world is today, that we just need to make sure that there is no appearance of impropriety, that the children are protected, that they feel safe, that we're taking those extra measures to make those children feel safe. And I have a she's a state senator in Minnesota, and she says, even when I meet with constituents, I leave my door open or I make sure there's another person in the room. And these are two adults. So we need to make sure that we're considering protecting our children from the same things that we would do as adults. One of the other things was it had an outdated scope of the age, incorporating digital communication, so visual and audio. It doesn't sufficiently address interactive platforms like Discord, Snapchat, Roblox, augmented reality, or avatar-based grooming, and ephemeral messaging, which is vanishing DMs or Snapchats, like we had mentioned earlier. And so they have real world consequences by not having this. My suggestion, and I sent this over to you, but would either involve expanding the definition of material to include artifacts of communication such as non-tangible digital contact and verbal interactive communication, and criminalize a pattern of conduct.
Yep.
So looking at some of those things, it can be as simple as an amendment to one of your existing statutes. It doesn't have to be a whole new section in your criminal code. But when you identify grooming, you protect children from being sexually assaulted, human trafficked, in abusive domestic relationships. Grooming happens, and it's that gateway behavior that happens to a lot of nefarious. Grooming is one of the precursors to sextortion, which is what Dr. Sadulski and I talk a lot about. Can you go into a little bit about sextortion?
Sure. So every parent that has a child that has access to the internet should understand that their child is a potential target of traffickers, right? So going into touching base on grooming before we get into sextortion. So we've come across case after case of victims that we've spoken to, and nearly all of them were groomed online. And so that's really where it starts. If a child goes on the internet and says nobody understands them or they hate their parents, that's gold to a trafficker. So parents need to really be aware of the dangers that exist online and to speak to their children about those dangers. One of those dangers is sextortion, which is sharing explicit, sexually explicit images, with somebody who then extorts that person for either more images, money, or for something else. And there was a situation, I could tell you, a lady named Teresa Flores, and she was not your typical trafficking victim. She came from an affluent family, and her family moved. Her dad was an executive that moved every 2 years, and they moved to a suburb outside of Detroit. She was 15 years old. She didn't know anybody. It's already awkward being 15, more awkward when you go to a new school and don't know anyone. Well, a boy approached her and was kind to her and said that instead of riding the school bus, that he would take her home in his car. She had an interest in the boy. On the way home, he stopped by her house, where she was given a soda that was drugged, and over the next several minutes she was sexually assaulted, and somebody came from the closet and photographed it. And so now there were pictures of this sexual assault. From there, the next day at school, this rapist guy comes up to her with the pictures and says that if she doesn't do what she's told to do by him, that those pictures are going to be released and cause her dad to lose her job. So for the next several years, 2 years, she was forced into trafficking situations because of those pictures alone. And that shows the power of these pictures. These pictures, to a 13-year-old or 14-year-old boy who has shared these pictures with somebody they thought they could trust, who is now extorting them, they feel there's no way out, and children are taking their lives over sextortion. So parents need to be aware of that. They also need to be aware that they need to talk to their children, and they need to explain to their children that no matter what, they can come to them whenever they're in trouble. And if that day comes that a child is a victim of sextortion, there's a program called Take It Down through the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children that for free will remove those images via hash values across the internet.
Was that child, the rapist, the boy in the school, was he connected to a cartel, or was he just this evil by himself? Was he doing that by himself, or was he connected?
He was not. I don't believe he was connected. To my knowledge, he wasn't.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's the age in which we live. I mean, these kids, it's just terrible.
There was a situation that happened near our hometown. It was actually, I think, a day or two ago, where authorities arrested 2 individuals out of Tampa that had masked themselves as another individual online, and a 13-year-old was tricked into meeting them. And luckily, law enforcement was able to intervene before anything happened. But this is the threat of cybercrimes, the digital world. If we don't have protections against, for protecting children against groomers, for protecting against sextortion, for protecting against cyber crimes, these are the things that we need to start thinking about. And AI is only going to make it worse. AI makes it easier for you to mask your identity. AI makes it easier for a predator to create CSAM material, which is child sexual abuse material. AI makes it easier to create a type of material that drives predators to crave more. And so we need to be careful in the age of AI, in the age of digital technology, in the age of gaming platforms and applications. When we hand our children a cell phone. We are handing them basically keys to a car. Would you hand your 8-year-old keys to a car? No. They need to go through driver's ed. They need to understand the threats out on the road. They need to understand the car itself. And we go through that type of training. We go through that type of protection. We have, laws for driving on the roads. Why don't we do that same thing to protect our children? But yet we hand them a cell phone with unfettered access to the internet. And it's a bad actor, it's a predator, it's a pedophile's playground. It is a playground for these bad actors. And so luckily that Take It Down Act got passed, signed into law by President Trump. So thank you so much, Melania Trump, for spearheading that legislation. That's really important. We need legislation like this grooming bill that kicks into place and cuts off the head of the snake before it bites somebody, before a child or an adult gets sexually assaulted, and before human trafficking occurs. But really, this legislation would benefit Kansas residents by protecting their children from threats that exist out there.
We are going to make it. It already is a campaign pillar for me. And as I've said in previous episodes, I've told you in our own private conversations offline here that there's an executive order waiting to be signed by me that will put an end to all of this, invoking the powers of governor to warn the National Guard and the Kansas Highway Patrol to begin to hunt these criminals down. You all will. We've got a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that I give you time. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, Allie Hopper, the president of Guard Against Trafficking. What did I say? GuardAgainstTrafficking.org, excuse me. And Dr. Jarrod Sadulski, the vice president of that organization. I want to work with the Kansas legislature. I want to work with both sides of the aisle. We are lucky that we have on paper at least a Republican supermajority in Kansas. Will you, as part of your mission, would you, when I'm elected, would you be my guest? Would you come and speak to the legislature? Would you help offer training to the KBI, to the Kansas troopers, to the National Guard, et cetera?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the lawmakers need to understand that the way that Dr. Sadulski and I approach this is a nonpartisan issue that should gain bipartisan support. When you're protecting children from sexual grooming, when you're protecting children from sextortion and human trafficking, that is a nonpartisan issue, and it should be viewed that way. The fact that it's been made partisan is absolutely ridiculous. It needs to be remembered. Who are we trying to protect here? We are trying to protect our most precious gift, and that's our children. And hopefully that's something that can unite both sides of the aisle, because it is a nonpartisan issue. And hopefully Kansas lawmakers can unite on the left and the right, shake hands, reach across the aisle to pass this legislation, because really it comes down to protecting everybody's children at the end of the day.
Well said and well met, Allie. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've invited Dr. Sadulski and Allie to come on the road with our campaign as we travel the state. And when it's appropriate, when time and schedules permit, I would like them to be on stage with me and our team to talk to you, good people throughout the state, about this very issue. Certainly after I'm elected, I expect to invite them in, certainly within the first few days of the administration, to begin this education process with the legislature, with our law enforcement officials, the National Guard, and so forth, to begin to, as Allie said, enable us all to see this is not partisan. This is a unifier. This should be something that anyone with any love of children and people within the state should be able to agree upon. 1 minute left, you guys. Any closing comments or thoughts for the people of Kansas before we have to say so long?
Sure, Doug. I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you for having us on, and thank you for making this issue, spotlighting this issue. It is so critically important that people understand that this isn't just something happening in another country or in Mexico or somewhere else. It's happening here. It's happening in Kansas. It's happening throughout the United States. So I really commend you for shedding a light on this issue.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up. Again, Allie Hopper, the president of GuardAgainstTrafficking.org, and Dr. Jarrod Sadulski, the vice president of that organization. Please go over to their website, look it up, and learn about them. Prayerfully consider supporting them in whatever way you can. We're going to have the information on the bottom of the screen throughout the interview. We'll have the National Child Trafficking Hotline that they mentioned. I'll have that all up on the screen for your reference. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, as always, we are in this thing together. Thank you for your support for my campaign for governor of Kansas. We're going to do this, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to do it for the Republic. We're going to do it for Kansas. Believe it. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.